Eli Mercer didn't remember hitting the ground. Just the sound of screeching metal, the white-hot panic as his control panels exploded in a shower of sparks, and the sudden, sickening sensation of freefall. By the time he woke up, sprawled across the cockpit floor, it was quiet, too quiet. Pushing himself up, he winced at the sharp pain in his side. The emergency systems had kicked in, keeping his ship sealed, but it was clear from the tilted angle of the floor and the smoke hanging in the air that it was damaged beyond anything his onboard repair kit could fix. The ground outside, visible through a cracked viewport, shimmered with an unnatural golden hue. The alien environment was like nothing he'd seen before. A dense, shimmering jungle of iridescent plants that seemed to sway in a non-existent breeze. "Well, this is just great," Eli muttered, his voice rasping in the stillness. He grabbed his helmet and forced the cockpit door open. The stale, metallic air of the ship gave way to the crisp, faintly sweet smell of the outside. As he stepped onto the spongy ground, the vegetation shifted slightly, as if it were aware of him. The light filtering through the canopy above glowed with a dim, honeyed quality that turned every surface to gold and bronze. "Not exactly the Bahamas," Eli said aloud. A sudden rustling behind him made him whirl around, hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm on his belt. A figure stepped out from the undergrowth. A man, roughly his height, clad in what looked like woven metallic fabric. His skin had a faint coppery sheen, and his deep-set eyes glimmered as they locked onto Eli's. The alien stood frozen, staring at him in a mix of curiosity and caution. Eli raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. Hey, easy. I come in peace. Okay?" The alien didn't respond immediately. Then, to Eli's surprise, it spoke in a smooth, resonant voice. "You not Xanthian. Where you from?" Eli blinked. Earth. Third planet in the Sol system. I guess I'm a bit off course." The alien's expression didn't change. "Earth? Not known to us. You fall from sky. This, your ship." He gestured toward the broken vessel. "Yeah, it's not looking so good now." Eli offered a small, crooked smile. "Can't exactly call AAA out here." "Say, what's your name?" After a brief hesitation, the alien replied, "I am Dran. You are alone." Eli shrugged. "Well, there were some others, but they're long gone. Guess it's just me." He hesitated, studying Dran's face. "So, what happens now? Are we good? I don't want to step on anyone's toes. If you have toes, that is." Dran didn't laugh, but he did lower his shoulders slightly, as if easing his guard. "We see. Come. I take you to my home." Eli's relief was evident as he followed Dran deeper into the jungle. The alien seemed confident, moving with purpose through the tangle of vines and strange, luminous flora. As they walked, Eli found himself bombarded by questions. "How far is your home?" "Not far." "What's this planet called?" "Xanthia." "How many of you live here?" Dran glanced back, his expression unreadable. "Enough. You ask many questions, Earthman." Eli shrugged. "Sorry. Habit of the job. Back home I was a navigator, explorer, well, technically a shuttle pilot, but I like to know where I'm going." They reached a break in the jungle where the ground sloped downward, revealing a sprawling valley below. Towering, crystalline structures rose from the landscape, their surfaces reflecting the golden light like giant prisms. It was breathtaking. "Is that your city?" Eli asked. Dran nodded. "You will stay there, but we must speak to the council first. They decide." "Decide what?" "Your fate." Eli stopped in his tracks. "Whoa, fate? What do you mean, fate? I thought you were just taking me in." Dran turned, and for the first time, a faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "Not so simple. We are cautious. But you speak well, Earthman. Perhaps you will convince them." Eli let out a long breath. "Great. No pressure, right?" The two men continued their descent into the valley, the jungle thinning as the shimmering city grew closer. Eli kept sneaking glances at Dran. Despite the alien's stoic demeanor, Eli could sense there was more going on beneath the surface. The way Dran occasionally glanced over his shoulder, or the faint shifts in his tone when he spoke, suggested a mix of curiosity and hesitation. For his part, Eli couldn't help feeling a strange sense of connection. Here he was, stranded on a foreign world, yet walking side by side with someone who, despite their differences, didn't seem so different at all. Chapter 2. A Fragile Truce. The council chamber was a cavernous hall carved from xanthian crystal, its walls glowing with an ambient light that reminded Eli of an underwater reef. Around him stood a semicircle of elders, each adorned in shimmering robes of dark green and silver. Dran stood at Eli's side, stiff and formal, his earlier trace of humor now buried under a serious demeanor. The lead elder, a tall figure with a sharp, angular face, stepped forward and regarded Eli with clear mistrust. Dran tells us you come from a distant world, an unknown people. His voice echoed in the chamber. Why have you come here, human? Eli's eyes flicked to Dran, who gave him a small nod, as if encouraging him to speak. Clearing his throat, Eli stepped forward. I didn't mean to come here. My ship got caught in a storm, something we didn't see coming, and I crash-landed. All I want is a chance to repair it and leave. I'm not here to cause any trouble. One of the elders, a shorter figure with bright, golden eyes, folded his arms. And yet trouble follows you. You bring foreign technology, strange ideas, the potential to disrupt our peace. That's not my intention, Eli said firmly. I just want to survive. If you help me, I can be out of your way before you know it. A tense silence settled over the chamber. The lead elder stroked his chin, his expression inscrutable. You expect us to trust the word of someone we know nothing about. Dran spoke up, his voice steady. He speaks plainly. He does not attempt to deceive. Perhaps he truly means no harm. The elder's sharp gaze shifted to Dran. And you would stake your reputation on this, Dran? That this human is not a danger to us. Dran hesitated, then gave a firm nod. I would. The elders murmured among themselves, their tones low and skeptical. Eli stood still, trying not to fidget, trying to project calm even as his pulse raced. Finally, the lead elder raised a hand, silencing the others. Very well. You may remain on Xanthia for now, but under strict observation. Dran, you will be responsible for him. Dran inclined his head. As you wish. The elder's eyes narrowed. Be warned, human. Any sign of deceit or aggression, and you will not find us so lenient a second time. Eli swallowed hard but managed to keep his voice steady. Understood. As the council adjourned, Dran turned to Eli and gave a small, rare smile. You did well. They do not trust easily. I kind of noticed, Eli replied dryly. So what now? Now, Dran said. We must prove you are no threat. Over the next several days, Dran and Eli spent their time together navigating Xanthia's unique landscape. Dran taught Eli how to walk the soft, pulsating ground without disturbing the sensitive flora. He explained how certain plants responded to specific frequencies, and how others emitted subtle warning lights when something unfamiliar approached. This is incredible, Eli said, crouching next to a large, glowing fern that pulsed gently beneath his touch. Your whole ecosystem's like a living network. Dran nodded. It is why we guard it so carefully. A single imbalance can ripple across our entire world. So you're worried I'm going to throw things off? It is not personal, Eli, Dran said carefully. We have had visitors before. Long ago. It did not end well. Eli looked up at him. What happened? Dran hesitated, then shook his head. It is a story for another time. For now, focus on learning our ways. The council is watching. Their days became a routine. Each morning, Dran would show Eli another aspect of Xanthian life, how the people lived in harmony with the natural world, how they used sound and light rather than force to influence their environment. Eli, in turn, shared stories of Earth, describing bustling cities, endless highways, and the marvel of flight. You move through the air on machines, Dran said one afternoon, his tone skeptical yet intrigued. Well, not me personally, Eli admitted, But yeah, planes, helicopters, jets, that's how we connect our world. Travel across oceans in hours. Dran's brow furrowed. This would be disruptive. To move so quickly. To see so much. Eli smirked. I guess we're not as patient as you guys. Their conversations often veered into philosophy. Dran questioned humanity's need for speed and expansion. Eli countered with stories of exploration, the thrill of discovering the unknown. Your people value change, Dran observed. Yeah, Eli said. Not always in a good way, but it's who we are. We push boundaries. Sometimes we fall on our faces, but other times we reach the stars. Dran was silent for a long moment, then nodded. Perhaps that is why you survived the storm. You do not give up. Eli looked at him, sensing a subtle shift in Dran's attitude. So, does that mean you're starting to trust me? Dran's lips curved into a faint smile. Perhaps. By the end of their second week, the tension had begun to lift. The council still watched, but with less suspicion. Dran seemed more at ease in Eli's presence, and Eli, in turn, found himself genuinely enjoying the aliens' company. Guess I'm not so bad after all, Eli teased one evening as they sat by a pool of glowing water. Do not get ahead of yourself, Earthman, Dran replied. But there was a warmth in his tone that hadn't been there before. For the first time since the crash, Eli felt a glimmer of hope. If he and Dran could work together, maybe, just maybe, he had a chance of getting home. Chapter 3, Learning Curves. Eli was starting to get the hang of things. Xanthia's rhythms were vastly different from anything he'd known on Earth, but Dran's patient guidance made it easier to adapt. Still, it wasn't exactly smooth sailing. Why is this tree glowing? Eli asked, pointing at a massive trunk that pulsed with soft, golden light. It is not a tree, Dran replied. It is the base of a cashier vine. The light signals the health of its root network. Okay, Eli said, cautiously circling the massive structure. And it's not going to suddenly grab me, right? Dran raised a brow. It is a plant, Eli, not a predator. Well, excuse me for being cautious, Eli muttered, earning a faint smile from his guide. Their lessons often felt more like mini-adventures. Dran's world was brimming with flora and fauna that responded to light, sound, and even thought. While Eli marveled at the alien landscape, he quickly learned that the rules here were unlike anything he'd dealt with before. One afternoon, Dran stopped abruptly in their walk and held out an arm to block Eli's path. Do not step there. Eli froze, peering down at what looked like a patch of moss. Why not? Volan moss, Dran explained. If you touch it, it releases a gas that will render you unconscious for several hours. Oh, great, Eli said. Thanks for the heads up. He took a deliberate step back, watching where Dran placed his feet. You know, on Earth, moss just kind of sits there and looks green. It's not out to get you. Dran's lips quirked upward. Then your world must be very dull. Eli chuckled. Not when you've got cities, cars, and... He paused, realizing how foreign those concepts might sound to Dran. I mean, sure, it's different, but here, everything feels alive in a way that's hard to explain. Like it's all connected. It is, Dran said simply, continuing down the path. You are starting to understand. That evening, as they set up camp by a small, glowing pond, Eli watched Dran expertly assemble a shelter from long ribbon-like leaves. All right, Eli said, gesturing to the structure. You've got to teach me how you did that. Dran didn't stop working as he replied. You lack the coordination. Eli smirked. Come on, give me a chance. I'm a fast learner. Dran glanced at him, then tossed a thick vine in his direction. Very well. Wrap this around the frame tightly. It must hold against the wind. Sure thing. Eli started threading the vine through the frame, his hands fumbling slightly. Dran watched, silently correcting his technique until the shelter actually resembled something sturdy. Well, Eli said, stepping back. It's not going to win any design awards, but it'll do. It will hold, Dran agreed. For now. As the firelight danced on the pond's surface, Eli leaned back against the shelter and let out a long breath. You know, I still can't believe I'm here. A month ago, I was complaining about ration packs. Now I'm on a completely different planet learning how to not get knocked out by moss. Dran tilted his head. Your people must live very differently. You have spoken of vast cities and machines. Yet you were not content. Content? Eli thought for a moment. I guess we're always looking for something better. That's just how we're wired. We reach for what's out of reach even if it's just to see if we can. Dran regarded him thoughtfully. That drive. It is both curious and dangerous. Sounds about right, Eli admitted, grinning. But it's also what got me here. I mean, yeah, the crash wasn't exactly planned, but if I hadn't been willing to explore, I wouldn't have seen, well, all of this. He waved a hand at the glowing pond, the alien flora, the faintly humming sky. For a moment, Dran seemed to consider this. Then he nodded once. You adapt quickly. Perhaps you will find your place here, even if only for a time. Eli raised an eyebrow. Is that your way of saying I'm not totally hopeless anymore? Dran's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. Do not let it go to your head, Earthman. The two sat in silence for a while after that, the alien landscape around them whispering with soft, rhythmic sounds. Eli found it oddly comforting. Despite the challenges, he felt like he was finally starting to get a handle on things. Tomorrow, Dran said, breaking the quiet, you will learn to navigate the shimmer fields. Eli frowned. Shimmer fields. You will see, Dran said, already settling down for the night. With a sigh, Eli lay back and stared at the faintly glowing stars above. Each day on Xanthea brought something new, something strange, and something almost impossible to believe. But at least now he wasn't facing it alone. Chapter 4, The Test. When Eli entered the chamber, the air was cooler than he expected. The walls shimmered faintly, reflecting fractured light patterns that danced across the floor. The council elders stood at the far end, their expressions neutral, their glowing robes stirring gently in a breeze Eli couldn't feel. Dran walked beside him, his usual calm replaced by a hint of unease. This is where they'll test me? Eli whispered. Dran gave a slight nod. Yes, they will want to measure your intentions, your ability to adapt. It may be uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? Eli repeated, his lips quirking into a humorless smile. Good to know. The lead elder stepped forward, hands folded neatly in front of him. Human, you have been among us for some time. We have observed your actions and heard your words. But words can be easily crafted. Intentions are more difficult to judge. Eli shifted his weight, his gaze darting to Dran. And what exactly do you expect me to do? The elder ignored the question. You will face 3 trials. Each will reveal something about your character. Dran will accompany you, but he will not intervene. He is here only to witness. Eli glanced at Dran again, who met his eyes briefly before stepping back. All right, Eli said. Let's get on with it. The first trial began without warning. A section of the floor slid open, revealing a glowing pathway. On either side, thick, translucent columns rose, humming with a low, resonant tone. You must walk the path, the elder explained, without disturbing the harmony of the columns. Step carefully. Eli took a deep breath. Got it. Don't mess with the glowing columns. As he stepped onto the path, the columns began to pulse in rhythm with his movements. Too fast, and the tone grew louder. Too slow, and it faltered. Eli quickly realized he had to maintain an even pace, matching his steps to the subtle vibrations in the air. Steady? Dran murmured from the side, his voice barely audible. Eli resisted the urge to glance over. His muscles burned as he adjusted his stride, but he kept moving. When he finally reached the end, the columns dimmed and the hum faded. Well done, the lead elder said, his voice carefully measured. The second trial will test your resolve. Before Eli could ask what that meant, the walls around him began to shift, folding and twisting until he stood in what looked like a dense forest of glowing vines. The air grew warmer, heavy with a faintly sweet scent. A soft, melodic voice echoed through the chamber. Human, find your way to the center. But be warned, this place reflects your thoughts. Stay focused or you may lose your path. Eli turned to Dran, who remained still and silent. So I just walk in? Yes, Dran said quietly. Do not let your mind wander. With a slow exhale, Eli stepped into the forest. The vines seemed to shift around him, creating new paths and closing others. He tried to concentrate, picturing the center in his mind. The vines responded, parting slightly, but every time his thoughts drifted, to Earth, to his crew, to whether he'd ever see home again, the path changed. Focus, Eli muttered under his breath. Just focus. He pressed forward, ignoring the whispers that seemed to come from the vines, the flashes of memories that appeared in the corners of his vision. The air grew heavier, his steps slower, but he kept going. Finally, he stepped into a small clearing where a single, glowing stone rested on the ground. Good, the melodic voice said. You have completed the second trial. Eli didn't have time to feel relieved. The walls shifted again, returning to the chamber's original form. The lead elder stepped forward, his expression as unreadable as ever. For the third and final trial, he said, you must face the unknown. Before Eli could ask what that meant, a large, opaque sphere descended from above, surrounding him and Dran. The air inside was silent, thick, and still. What's going on? Eli asked, looking around. You must trust, Dran said, his voice calm but firm. Stay still and do not react. The sphere began to glow faintly, then more brightly. Shapes moved in the light, figures, memories, fears. Eli saw himself floating in the void of space. His ship shattered around him. He saw his crewmates calling out for help, their voices silent in the vacuum. He saw Earth, distant and unreachable, slipping further away. His breathing quickened, but he heard Dran's voice again. Stay still. Do not let it control you. Eli closed his eyes, forcing himself to take slow, measured breaths. The images continued, shifting and twisting, but he kept his mind Oh, permit you to stay. Eli gave a small nod, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Thanks, he said, his voice laced with weariness. Dran stepped closer, a faint trace of approval in his expression. You did well. Eli shot him a tired grin. Next time, how about a little warning? Dran's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Would you have preferred that? Not really, Eli admitted. But I wouldn't have turned it down either. Chapter 5 Bonds Beyond Worlds. Saris was not at all like the other Xanthians. While most of the inhabitants were content to observe Eli from a distance or speak in carefully measured tones, Saris approached him with genuine curiosity. She often came by unannounced, asking questions about his home world and sharing bits of her own culture in return. You mean your people live in towers that stretch to the sky? She asked one evening, her bioluminescent eyes wide. Why would you go so high? Is the ground not stable? Eli chuckled as he leaned back against a tall, vine-covered tree. It's not about stability, it's about space. More people means we need more room, and building up is sometimes easier than building out. Plus, the views are incredible. Saris tilted her head, her coppery skin glinting in the dim light. So, you stack your lives on top of one another like the layers of a hive? Sort of, Eli said with a grin. But with elevators. I'd show you if I could, but my tablet's pretty fried after the crash. She leaned closer, inspecting the small device clipped to his belt. It is strange to think of such a thing. Tools that can show other places, other worlds. It's not so strange, Eli said. You have technology, too. Just different. Saris smiled faintly, but didn't reply. Instead, she ran her fingers along the bark of the tree beside them. Do you miss it? Your tower hive world. I miss parts of it, Eli admitted. But being here, seeing how your people live, it makes me think. We always focus on growing bigger, going faster, building more. But you've got something different here. It's peaceful. Saris considered his words for a long moment before sitting down next to him. Peace is not the same as contentment. Our way of life is quiet, but it is not without its challenges. Sometimes I wonder if we should be more like you, seeking new places, new ideas. You'd make a great explorer, Eli said with a grin. Saris's smile grew. You think so? Definitely. You're curious and you ask good questions. That's half the job right there. She laughed, a sound that was soft and lilting, and leaned back against the tree. For a while, they simply sat there, listening to the faint hum of the forest around them. You know, Saris said eventually, I was told to keep my distance from you. My elders worry that you will disrupt our ways. Eli gave her a sidelong glance. And yet, here you are. Yes, she said simply. Here I am. Her hand rested on the ground beside his, close but not quite touching. Eli noticed, and for a moment he wondered if it was intentional. His thoughts raced, a mixture of confusion and something he couldn't quite name. He glanced at her, and she met his gaze with a steady, questioning look. Do your people touch often? She asked suddenly. Touch, Eli echoed. You mean like holding hands? Hugging? Yes, Saris said. I have seen you reach out to steady yourself or to greet someone, but you never do so with me. Why? Eli hesitated. I just didn't want to make you uncomfortable. I don't know how it works here. What's appropriate? She looked thoughtful. Touch is not forbidden, if it is given freely. Can be a gesture of trust. Or curiosity. Eli considered this, then extended his hand, palm up. Okay, let's start with trust. Saris regarded his hand for a moment before placing her fingers lightly against his. Her skin was warm, her touch delicate. She tilted her head, studying his hand as though it were an artifact from another world. It is strange, she murmured. Your hands are solid. Your skin feels different from ours. You're not so different, Eli said quietly. Saris glanced up, meeting his gaze. Her fingers lingered against his for a moment longer before she pulled back, her expression thoughtful. Perhaps not. The next day, when Saris returned, they spent hours exploring the forest together. She showed him how the plants responded to certain sounds, how the streams glowed when disturbed, and how the air felt different in the deeper groves. Eli found himself looking forward to her visits, her questions, her laughter. As days turned into weeks, their conversations grew deeper. Saris shared stories of her people's history, their triumphs and mistakes, their fears of the unknown. Eli, in turn, told her about Earth's long journey to the stars, the wars and discoveries, the moments of unity and division. One evening, as the twin moons rose above the horizon, Saris turned to Eli. You've been here long enough to leave a mark on us, you know? I don't think I've done anything that important, Eli said with a wry smile. You have, she insisted. You've shown me that there's more beyond the borders of our world, and you've reminded me that there is still much to learn. Eli scratched the back of his neck, unsure how to respond. Well, I guess you've taught me just as much. I don't think I'd have survived this long without you. You would have managed, Saris said with a soft smile. But I am glad I was here to help. The two sat in silence again, the sounds of the forest filling the space between them. For the first time, Eli didn't feel like a stranger in a strange land. He felt like he belonged, if only a little. Chapter 6, Echoes of Doubt. Eli sat cross-legged on a mossy ridge, staring down at the distant Xanthian settlement below. His breathing was slow and measured, his focus locked on the horizon. Beside him, Dran rested one knee against the ground, fiddling with a slender, humming instrument that looked like a mix between a tuning fork and a harp. What exactly are you doing? Eli asked, his voice low but curious. Calibrating, Dran replied without looking up. The council expects a report on your progress. I must be thorough. Eli tilted his head, smirking slightly. I'm not a science project, you know? No, Dran said, the corners of his mouth twitching upward ever so slightly. You are more unpredictable than any experiment I have conducted. That's one way to put it, Eli said, watching as the settlement lights began to shimmer. He could make out Saris in the distance, speaking animatedly with a few of the other Xanthians. She's been more open with me lately. Dran finally set the instrument down and gave Eli a considering look. She is curious, but curiosity can lead to danger. Eli raised an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? You are not like us, Dran said plainly. No matter how much she learns about you, there will always be complications. Complications, Eli repeated. Well, that's comforting. Dran sighed, his usually composed demeanor cracking just enough to show a hint of frustration. She believes you can teach us something valuable. I am not so certain. Eli frowned. I'm not here to teach anybody anything. I'm just trying to figure things out. Same as her. Is that so wrong? Dran turned to face him fully, his gaze steady. You must understand Saris is not like the others. She questions what others accept. That is why she is drawn to you. But the more she questions, the more uncertain our people will become. Eli held his gaze for a long moment. Maybe uncertainty isn't a bad thing. Dran didn't respond, and the silence between them stretched until the sky above darkened to deep indigo. Finally, he stood and began packing his equipment. Come. The council will not wait much longer. Back at the settlement, Eli found Saris waiting near the central plaza, her copper-toned skin reflecting the light from the crystalline structures around them. She greeted him with a smile that faded when she noticed Dran's tense expression. What happened? She asked, her voice light but probing. Just a little heart-to-heart, Eli said with a shrug. Saris looked between the two of them, then stepped closer to Eli. I wanted to show you something before you meet with the council. Come with me. Before he could answer, she was already walking away, her movements quick and purposeful. Eli glanced at Dran, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. With a small shrug, Eli followed Saris through the winding paths of the settlement until they reached a wide, open courtyard. The space was quiet, filled with large, flat stones that glowed faintly in the moonlight. At the center stood a single, massive crystal formation. Its surface was smooth and mirrored, reflecting everything around it. This is where we keep our most ancient records, Saris said, gesturing to the crystal. They are not written as you would write them. They are imprinted. Memories, thoughts, images, preserved inside. Eli approached the crystal carefully. So, this is your history? Not just ours, Saris said. This is where we store what we know about other worlds, other visitors. Eli glanced at her sharply. You've had visitors before? She nodded. Long ago. Most left little behind, but their presence remains here. She reached out, placing her hand against the crystal. It's not something we share freely. Dran and the others believe it's best to forget. But I think you should see. Before Eli could respond, the crystal began to shimmer more brightly. Images flickered across its surface. Strange ships, beings that didn't resemble Xanthians at all, faint impressions of voices speaking in languages Eli didn't recognize. I don't understand, Eli said softly. These visitors, Saris explained, came in peace, but their presence disrupted our ways, made us question what we believed to be true. It caused unrest. Eli studied the images, trying to make sense of them. So that's why everyone's so on edge about me. Partly, Saris said. But you're different. You're not just passing through. You're staying. That's why Dran worries. Eli turned to her. And what about you? Are you worried? Saris hesitated, then shook her head. No, I want to understand you, to see what can come from this. Maybe our people need to be challenged, need to question their old ways. But if we're going to move forward, it will take more than just words. Eli took a step closer to her, the faint glow of the crystal casting shadows on both their faces. So what do we do? Saris met his gaze steadily. We keep going, keep learning, one step at a time. Eli nodded slowly. All right, one step at a time. The two stood in silence as the images faded from the crystal's surface, leaving only their reflections staring back. Chapter 7, The Revelation. Eli squinted into the sunlight as he climbed the rocky slope. The view from the top would be worth the sweat, Saris had promised, though her definition of short hike left him wondering if she'd ever scaled this particular peak herself. "Are you always this slow?" Saris called from above, her voice carrying down the trail. "Maybe if I had legs as long as yours," Eli retorted, leaning on a tree trunk for support. Dran, who had been trailing silently behind, paused and tilted his head. "I think her legs are no longer than yours, Earthman." Eli smirked. "It's an expression. It just means I'm tired and she's not." Dran frowned thoughtfully but said nothing. Saris reappeared on the ridge above them, her copper-toned skin catching the late afternoon light. "We're almost there. Don't give up now." "Not giving up," Eli muttered, pushing forward. "Just pacing myself." The three reached the top moments later, stepping onto a flat plateau ringed with crystalline outcroppings. The air felt thinner here, the light sharper. In the center of the plateau stood a circular structure made of iridescent stone, weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Its entrance was open, dark and silent. "This is it," Saris said, walking ahead. "The Hall of Encounters. It's one of the oldest places on Xanthea." Eli followed her, his breathing finally steadying as he took in the sight. The stones seemed to shimmer with an inner glow, casting faint reflections on the ground. Dran stood back, his expression neutral but alert, as Saris led Eli toward the entrance. "Why are we here?" Eli asked. Saris glanced over her shoulder, her lips curving into a small smile. "Because you need to understand." The hall's interior was cool and dark, with faint lines of luminescence tracing the walls. Saris moved to the center, where a circular platform lay embedded in the floor. Dran remained by the doorway, his eyes watching every shadow. "This place," Saris said, turning to Eli, "was built long before my time, long before any of us. It's where our ancestors first met beings from beyond our world." Eli stepped closer, his gaze following the faintly glowing patterns on the walls. "Other aliens?" "Yes," Saris said, "and among them were humans." Eli froze. "Wait, humans? You mean people from Earth?" Saris nodded, her expression serious now. "We called them something else then, of course. But the stories remain. They came from the stars, as you did. They brought knowledge, ideas, and conflict." Eli rubbed the back of his neck. "So you're saying this isn't the first time you've met one of us?" "No," Saris said, "but it has been centuries, and the memory of those encounters is complicated." Eli took a step back, processing her words. "Why didn't anyone tell me? Why keep it secret?" Dran spoke from the doorway, his voice calm but firm. "Because it is not a story we tell lightly. The past was not kind. The first humans brought change that our ancestors were not prepared for. Their arrival divided our people, led to what?" Eli asked, his tone sharp. Dran's expression didn't shift. "Strife. And eventually their departure. Afterward, our people chose to close our borders, to remain hidden. You are the first outsider we have allowed to stay since that time." Eli stared at them both. "So I'm walking into a history I didn't even know existed." Saris stepped closer, her voice softer. "You are not responsible for what happened before, but you need to know why my people are cautious, why they are slow to trust." Eli crossed his arms, frowning. "It would have been nice to know this sooner. I thought it would be better to show you," Saris said, "to let you see it for yourself." She touched the circular platform in the center of the room, and it came to life. Images flickered above it. Ghostly figures of humans standing beside Xantheans, exchanging strange objects, speaking in languages that Eli couldn't understand. The scenes shifted, showing moments of collaboration and conflict, triumph and loss. Eli watched in silence, his chest tight. When the images faded, he looked at Saris. "So now what? Do your people expect me to make up for what happened centuries ago?" "No," Saris said, "but they expect you to be different. And maybe, just maybe, you can show them that history doesn't always have to repeat itself." Dran finally stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. We are watching, Earthman. What you do here matters. Eli held Dran's gaze, then turned back to Saris. You could have told me all of this back at the settlement. Saris smiled faintly. I could have. But would you have believed me? Eli sighed. Probably not. He took another look at the hall, the images still lingering in his mind. All right, I get it. History's watching. But I can only do so much. Do what you can, Saris said. That will be enough. As the three of them stepped back into the sunlight, Eli's thoughts churned. He had come to Xanthea expecting only to survive, to fix his ship and leave. Now, it seemed he was part of something much larger, whether he wanted to be or not. Chapter 8: New Horizons. Eli stood at the edge of a wide, shimmering plateau, staring at the horizon where Xanthea's twin suns were setting in streaks of gold and violet. Beside him, Saris was quiet, her expression calm but thoughtful. They had walked much of the day to reach this vantage point, and now the view stretched endlessly, alien and beautiful. What do you see? Saris asked softly, breaking the silence. Eli tilted his head, taking in the distant mountains and the rippling forest canopies. A whole lot of unknowns, he said. A place I never thought I'd find. And now, he shrugged. Now I can't imagine not knowing it's here. Saris smiled faintly. You have changed since you first arrived. Yeah, Eli admitted. Kind of hard not to when you crash land on a planet with glowing trees and living rocks. He glanced at her, a hint of humor in his voice. Not to mention meeting someone like you. Her smile widened slightly, though she quickly masked it by looking away. I could say the same for myself. I never expected to meet a human. I never expected to care about one. Eli's throat tightened at her words, but he forced himself to keep his tone light. You care about me, huh? Don't let it go to your head, Saris said, her voice still soft. They lapsed into silence again, watching as the suns dipped lower. After a moment, Dran appeared behind them, walking with his usual quiet precision. He stopped a few paces away, his hands clasped behind his back. Are you ready? He asked. Eli turned to face him. Ready for what, exactly? Dran regarded him evenly. The council has agreed to let you remain here, but not without conditions. You are expected to contribute, to show that your presence here is not a burden. Eli nodded. Makes sense. I wouldn't want to be dead weight. You never were, Saris said quietly. Dran ignored the comment. You will have access to limited resources, but you must work with us. Learn our ways. Help us understand yours. There is much we can gain from mutual cooperation, but only if you prove yourself trustworthy. Eli frowned. I thought I already did that. Dran raised an eyebrow. You passed our initial tests, but trust is not earned in a single moment. It must be maintained. Saris stepped forward then, her voice calm but firm. And if he makes a mistake, will you cast him out? Dran's expression didn't change. That will depend on the nature of the mistake. Eli exhaled sharply. Great. No pressure. You have managed so far, Dran said, his tone almost dry. I suggest you continue. The three of them walked down from the plateau as the suns disappeared below the horizon. The light faded quickly, leaving only the faint bioluminescent glow of the vegetation to guide their way. Saris stayed close to Eli, occasionally glancing over at him, while Dran remained a few steps ahead. When they reached the settlement, a small group of Xantheans was gathered in the central plaza. Some of them looked curious, others wary. It was clear that Eli was still a point of contention, an outsider whose presence stirred both interest and unease. Saris leaned closer to Eli and whispered, They'll come around eventually. Just give them time. Time I've got, Eli replied, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. Dran stepped forward and addressed the group. The council has spoken. The human will stay under our guidance. He will learn our ways and share his knowledge in return. This is not an experiment, it is an exchange. We will proceed cautiously, but we will proceed. I guess that makes me the new guy on the block. I'll try not to mess it up. Sari smiled, and even Dran's expression softened slightly. The crowd began to disperse, leaving the three of them alone in the plaza. Eli turned to Saris. "So, what now?" "Now," Saris said. "We get to work." She began to walk toward one of the nearby structures, gesturing for Eli to follow. Dran remained behind for a moment, watching them go. His eyes were unreadable, but he gave a slight nod before turning away. Eli caught up to Saris, who was already outlining what they would do next. Tasks to help integrate him into their society. Projects that would benefit both him and the Xanthians. As she spoke, he realized that, despite the challenges, he was looking forward to it. The unknowns that had once intimidated him now seemed more like opportunities. For the first time since arriving on Xanthia, Eli felt like he might actually belong. Not as a visitor or an outsider, but as someone who had something to contribute, someone who was part of something bigger.